In this series, we're going to explore the history of capitalism. In this episode, we'll talk about the word itself. The people who built capitalism didn't even call it capitalism. Adam Smith didn't use the word. The American founders didn't announce they were establishing a capitalist nation. Factory owners weren't standing around saying, "Welcome to capitalism, boys." Nope, the system developed first. Then other people looked at what it was doing and said, well, this mess needs a name. Now, the word starts with capital. That word had been around much longer. It comes through medieval Latin and originally referred to the principal part of a loan, the main sum, separate from the interest. Over time, capital came to mean wealth, used to create more wealth, money, equipment, buildings, raw materials, and other productive assets. And that distinction matters. A hammer can be capital. A tractor can be capital. A factory can be capital. Money used to start a business can be capital. But none of those things by themselves are capitalism. Capital is a thing or a collection of useful resources. Capitalism is a particular social arrangement built around who owns those resources, who works with them, and who gets the profit. Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations in 1776. He wrote about capital, merchants, manufacturers, landlords, laborers, markets, and the division of labor. But he never called the system capitalism. In fact, the word did not become widely used until long after Smith died. Smith was describing what he called commercial society, and he was not the cartoon libertarian folks make him out to be. He warned about monopolies, collusion among businessmen, worker exploitation, and the political influence of merchants. But that's another video. The French word capitalisme appeared as early as 1753, but it did not yet mean the economic system we mean today. It referred roughly to the condition of being wealthy. Then, in 1842, a French dictionary defined capitalisme as a system of capitalization. Getting closer, but still not quite the modern political meaning. The earliest known English use dates back to 1833. That alone is interesting because the word appears after industrialization had begun transforming society. Factories were spreading, land and productive property were concentrating, and more people had to survive by selling their labor to owners. In other words, people didn't invent capitalism from a nice little blueprint and then build it according to instructions. They built banks, plantations, factories, trading companies, property laws, wage systems, and financial institutions. Then somebody finally looked at the whole contraption and named it. Clearest early modern definition came from French socialist Louis Blanc in 1850. Blanc was arguing with economist Frédéric Baptiste about capital and interest, and Blanc and Baptiste kept confusing two different things: the usefulness of capital and capitalism. Blanc defined capitalism as the appropriation of capital by some to the exclusion of others. Now put that in regular country English, capital is the mill. Capitalism is when one fellow owns the mill, everybody else has to work in it, and the owner gets to keep what remains after paying the workers as little as he can manage. Blanc wasn't arguing that tools, buildings, or machinery were evil. He was asking why a small group of people should own nearly all the tools people need to work and live. He pointed out that if the land, stone, timber, wool, machinery, and workplaces have already been claimed by someone else, then a person born without property has precious few options. They can work for an owner on the owner's terms, or they can go without the resources needed to survive. That is why the original criticism of capitalism was not just people buy and sell things. Human beings had traded for thousands of years. The criticism was that ownership of productive wealth gave one class power over another. French anarchist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon later described capitalism as a system where capital, the source of income, generally does not belong to the people whose labor makes it productive. Karl Marx developed the most famous analysis of the system, but even Marx generally wrote about capital, capitalists, and the capitalist mode of production, rather than constantly using capitalism as a neat little brand name. Around the beginning of the 20th century, scholars such as Werner Sombart and Max Weber helped establish capitalism as a broad historical and economic category, a way to describe an entire social order, not merely rich people or accumulated money. And here's the part I find mighty revealing. Capitalism was not originally named like some proud invention. It was named as a diagnosis. The word emerged because critics needed to distinguish ordinary commerce from a system where owners of capital could control production and collect income from work performed by other people. That is why modern defenders work so hard to redefine capitalism as simply buying things, having a job, starting a small business, using tools, trading with your neighbor. But none of that defines capitalism. Trade is trade, work is work, tools are tools, markets are markets. Capitalism describes the ownership structure sitting on top of those things. It describes a system in which the means of producing society's wealth are primarily controlled as private capital, and access to them is granted on terms that benefit the owners. So the next time somebody says capitalism just means voluntary trade, ask them why the word had to be invented in the first place. We already had words for trade. We already had words for markets. We already had words for money, property, business, and commerce. Capitalism was coined because people needed a word for the power that comes from owning the capital everybody else must use. The machine existed before the label. The people trapped inside it gave it a name. And naturally, the owners have been trying to rename it freedom ever since.